Now, just imagine building a multi-billion-dollar blockchain empire and realizing that you've been basically doing it for free. And now, you have to convince the very community that you helped create to pay the tab. Cardano's latest drama dropped into my weekend like a surprise software update that no one asked for. I was curled up with my laptop ready to kind of binge another layer 2 rabbit hole when Charles Hoskinson's livestream alert pinged. Why is the founder of Cardano suddenly talking about working for free since 2020? Now I wondered, coffee halfway to my face. 3 hours later, my espresso was cold, my brain was buzzing, and I couldn't stop replaying the wild plot twist that we're about to unpack together today, because it's a plot that could decide how decentralized projects handle money, power, and trust for years to come. Okay, here's the short version so you know what ride that you've hopped onto. Charles Hoskinson says his original contract, signed back at Cardano's birth in 2015, quietly expired in 2020. Since then, he and the engineers at 𝗕𝗘𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪😂 have kept coding away, pushing upgrades like Hydra and dreaming up, lots of other new updates, even though the treasury wasn't cutting them a paycheck. Now, they're asking the network's elected reps to pony up roughly 26.8 million ADA. It's about 19.4 million US dollars at today's 72 cents price. At least for a 12-month sprint, to keep Cardano's roadmap on track. Now, meanwhile, critics cry centralization, and the whole community is forced to decide whether to bankroll the guy who literally wrote the first lines of Cardano's DNA. Oh, and Mickey Watkins, the CEO of World Mobile, has jumped into the comments yelling, "Nobody's better to drive Cardano than Charles. It's crazy not to back him." And you're going to see why my coffee went ice cold. Okay, let's rewind to that live stream. Picture Charles in his usual kind of Colorado kind of ranch setting, cowboy hat off, but instantly kind of dialed up to 11, right? He starts by dropping the bombshell. Input-Output Global, the studio that steered Cardano from a kind of white paper to a top 10 blockchain, hasn't taken a dime since the original scaling milestones were met. Now, those milestones, they laid out a decade ago and promised a base layer capable of growing with demand. Now, technically, the box is ticked, but in crypto, scaling is a perpetual moving target. Today, the buzzwords are Hydra, the state channels that are aimed at kind of slashing latency, right? And you've then got zero knowledge flavored upgrades as well, meant to squeeze more transactions into every block without sacrificing, decentralization. So think of Hydra as the network of kind of lightning fast kind of tentacles, and 𝗕𝗓𝗪 as the kind of secret compression spell that makes each tentacle superhuman. It's sexy, right? Maybe, right? Except, of course, R&D at that kind of level, it burns through cash faster than a meme coin pump. And Charles admits that they're running out, or at least out of a kind of lighter fluid here. So why hasn't anyone noticed the unpaid elephant in the room before now then? Well, blame open sourced culture then, right? Developers are used to kind of grinding out lines of code in their spare time for the love of the mission. ADA had kind of a treasury of 1.7 billion ADA, sitting just out of reach. And it's easy to assume that someone somewhere, is actually footing the bill. Now, in reality, Input-Output has been fronting costs, hoping the community would eventually formalize a budget, right? That moment is here. But Cardano's first on-chain kind of fiscal year is ending, and the elected delegate representatives, DREPs for short, must reconcile this kind of interim budget. Now, back in January, 72% of them voted to cap new spending at 350 million ADA. Caps are great for discipline, but they also mean choosing winners. Now, if IOG, doesn't get a slice, well, Hydra might crawl instead of sprint, and 𝗬𝗓𝗪 could become that cool idea that everyone kind of posts meme about, but never actually deploys. Enter Mickey Watkins with the loudest bullhorn in the room, right? Watkins kind of heads up World Mobile, a project that literally beams internet connectivity to remote villages using hot air balloons and Cardano's blockchain to settle networks, at least in minutes, right? Now, his kind of nickname is Mr. Telecom because, for at least because of his kind of years, I guess, of connecting the unconnected, right? But during the kind of founding, at least funding debate, Watkins fired off an X post reading, paraphrased as, it's crazy not to back Charles, right? There's nobody better to drive Cardano, coming from a partner building real world applications on Cardano. Now that's an endorsement kind of landed like a mic drop, right? Imagine Tesla's biggest kind of battery supplier tweeting that Elon deserves a raise, or the whole EV market could stall. But endorsements, they don't quill the decentralized critics, right? Their argument goes, if Cardano keeps cutting checks to the same founding company, then doesn't that poison the promise of network of equals, right? It's the kind of blockchain equivalent of an adult child still borrowing dad's credit card, right? Spread the funding around, they say. Let different teams build competing solutions. Sounds noble, right? Until you realize that competing teams often rely on IOG-built tooling and decades of cryptography expertise that isn't easily duplicated, right? It's like telling NASA, right? Thanks for the moon landing, but we'll go ahead and build the Mars rocket ourselves and just hand over the blueprints. And then there's the human element that nobody wants to talk about, motivation, right? Charles swears passion drives him more than money, which I buy. He's been live streaming protocol theory at 2 a.m. while the rest of us kind of binge watch Netflix. Still, passion doesn't pay salaries for hundreds of engineers. One Hydra dev recently joked in a Telegram chat, "I'd code for pizza, but my landlord only accepts ADA or dollars." Right? The community laughs, but behind the meme is a genuine fear, right? Talent will drift to other ecosystems if Cardano underfunds its builders, right? There's a reason Solana, Ethereum, and even other kind of cheeky meme coin chains host kind of hackathons with flashy grants, right? Developers follow resources the way that miners follow gold. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, give the man his ADA and move on. But let's crunch the numbers together so that we're not just throwing stardust into the air. Right? The ask is for 26.848 million ADA. That's roughly 1.58% of the Treasury's 1.7 billion ADA war chest. Now, in traditional kind of startup terms, Cardano could still be hoarding a runway the size of a small country's GDP. And the funding isn't a kind of blank check, right? It buys a 12-month roadmap, including Hydra optimizations, 𝗬𝗓𝗪 research, peer-reviewed security audits, and a transparent quarterly reporting mandate. Now, if you've ever kind of tried hiring cryptographers, you know that they don't come cheap, right? One senior ZK engineer can command $500,000 in Silicon Valley. Suddenly, 19 million doesn't look so outrageous. The bigger question, and here's where my kind of own forehead hits the desk, is how a decentralized treasury should actually measure value, right? Do we judge by GitHub commits, TPS increases, market cap, community vibes on X, right? For context, when IOG shipped the Vasil hard fork back in 2022, Cardano's capacity climbed and DREPs through the roof, at least throughput, kind of improved measurably. Yet ADA's price kind of yo-yoed with macro tides like Bitcoin sneezing or the Fed whispering about rates. So DREPs need to weigh deliverables that they can see, that's code, documentation, uptime, against real price volatility, right? And price action that they absolutely can't control, right? Talk about pressure, because imagine being a school board, school board voting on a new science lab, right? While Wall Street traders bet on your decisions in, well, real time. Meanwhile, Hydra's testnet numbers tease what's at stake, right? Early benchmarks show sub-second finality for micropayments and gaming NFTs, right? Use cases kind of screaming for scale, right? You got Louis promising to stack zero knowledge proofs so that that kind of batches of transactions get verified in parallel, basically making Cardano's blocks feel like seats on a bullet train instead of a slow commuter rail. Now, if these upgrades stall, developers may pivot to other chains offering immediate throughput, and users follow apps, not white papers. Just look at the exodus of the DeFi farmers who bought from Ethereum to cheaper turf in 2021. Right? Loyalty in crypto is notoriously fickle, right? Lose momentum and you're yesterday's chain. So let's zoom out to the human drama again, because crypto may be math, but governance is feelings. Now, Charles isn't merely a CEO. To many ADA holders, he's a kind of mythic hero, right? The guy who left Ethereum, I should say, after kind of vision clashes and vowed to build a better mousetrap. Now, others kind of think he hogs the spotlight and drops spicy tweets that kind of rile markets. Now, either way, his presence is kind of felt, right? Now, Watkins' crazy not to back him kind of tweet pours gasoline on that kind of cult personality fire, right? It forces every D-rep to ask, am I funding a protocol or a person, right? That's uncomfortable, but it's also the sort of uncomfortable, at least that sort of uncomfortable that kind of forges mature growth, right? Decentralization isn't ignoring leaders. It's actually figuring out how to pay them without turning them into, well, kings. Okay, quick personal tangent that hammered this home for me. Last year, I tried running a tiny DAO to fund open sourced video editing tools. Right? Everyone kind of loved voting on the proposals until the developers who we'd hired actually asked for more than the kind of peanuts that we had actually budgeted. Suddenly, half of the DAO screamed, he's greedy. The other half yelled, we're underpaying or we'll never ship, right? The project stalled, the dev left for a salaried gig, and well, the DAO treasury still sits untouched, right? A monumental moment of indecision, right? Watching the kind of Cardano debate feels like deja vu, right? Just scaled up to billions of dollars and a global community. The lesson here, decisions delayed are upgrades denied. So where does that leave us right now? Well, D-reps have days, not weeks, to finalize the interim budget before the on-chain fiscal year closes. If they vote yes, IOG gets its runway. Hydra sprints, Leos research hums without the engineers kind of refresh checking LinkedIn, and Cardano continues its reputation for curiosity, kind of innovating under peer review. Right? If they vote no or slice the number to ribbons, well, Charles says that he'll kind of keep contributing one way or another, but you can bet moral will dip, deadlines will slip, and rival ecosystems will start kind of whispering sweet job offers to, restless devs. Right? Either outcome will echo far beyond ADA's price chart. It'll plant a flag about how decentralized treasuries value original builders versus pure ideological decentralization. And while, of course, the grown-ups argue, the rest of us, kind of retail holders, just want the chain that we love to actually keep getting faster, cheaper, and more useful. We don't care about who writes the commits as long as our NFT mints without gas fee heart attacks and our DeFi yields don't vanish into kind of scheduling backlogs. That's why, personally, I lean towards cutting the check with clear milestones and strict transparency baked in. right? Pay the builders, audit the invoices, rinse and repeat. Decentralization without deliverables is just theatre. Now, before we wrap, right, quick reminder, if you want to keep this conversation going, swap hot takes, or watch me kind of eat humble pie if the vote goes sideways, hop into our free crypto Discord. There's a link right in the description down below, right? It's the chill corner of the internet where Hydra benchmarks drop faster than Charles Hoskinson's streams of consciousness, and, you know, the meme channels will never kind of sleep. So here's my final take on this kind of, I guess, news, right? So it's delivered in two breaths, right? Cardano is staring at a mirror, right? Asking whether it still kind of trusts the face that started it back since day one, right? Backing Charles might feel like leaning on kind of training wheels, but yanking those wheels off before the bike has actually hit top speed could send everyone over the handlebars. Right, the Treasury has the funds, the roadmap has the ambition, the community has the vote, right? History will decide whether they synchronized at the kind of perfect moment or missed the kind of green light by overthinking at the kind of intersection.